What's up, guys? Welcome back to Roensch Capital Charts. Today we're taking a look at advanced micro devices, AMD stock, ticker symbol AMD, on a variety of time frames in anticipation of the next trading day, Tuesday, March 5th. Alright guys, AMD stock today, Monday, finishing the day up $2.72 a share, 1.34%, locking in a new all-time high, a big day here for AMD. Let's dive in. Let's try to pull out as much bias as we possibly can out of today's trading, the volume profile, psychological self-fulfilling prophecy levels to pay attention to tomorrow, and let's see what the options traders are thinking as we head in to tomorrow. So this, of course, is the intraday 1-minute chart. What I want to do here on AMD is start on the 5-minute and dive in with our daily ritual, the volume profile analysis. Again, we're always looking for big changes in volume that correlate with an obvious move in stock price, but it has to be out of context of what is typically expected at that time of day. Otherwise, without that, it's not really out of the ordinary at all, and it doesn't really tell us that a larger sample size of the market than is normal at that particular time agreed with that specific move any more than what we already expect them to. So if we look at obvious moves, you can kind of see like this move off the open, right? This move into the close. We would expect higher volume on those, but we'll take a look. And then you can argue some of these wiggles here in the middle of the day. If we take a look here, like looking at the close, for example, that is not more than what is contextually expected. So bears, I'm sorry, but that's a wash. Bulls off the open. I mean, look, we typically expect this U shape in volume where the close is lower than the open, but it's kind of a U nonetheless, right? Bulls, you know, again, it's really not all that out of the ordinary, the volume that we did get. It's a lot. We expect a lot of volume off the open, but it's not so out of context, right? Now, this red candle here that we saw higher volume on, just understand that that was the all-time high candle, and it had a big wick. It just barely ended up being red. So understand that this was likely a lot of bullish and bearish battling going on. I would not call this a definitive bearish candle where the bears won that candle. It just happened to be red. Again, it was small red with a major wick up to that all-time high of 211.01, which pumped up the volume when you get battles like that. So truly nothing groundbreaking here in the 5-minute volume profile analysis. And honestly, bulls, since we saw that all-time high hit off the open, right? I would argue it's probably a positive thing that we didn't really see any huge, volume profile curveballs here later in the day as the stock was fading, because they probably would have ended up being to the downside, right? And we didn't see that, which I would argue is probably a decent thing if you're a bull looking at this. Let's move on here to the psychological levels, the self-fulfilling prophecy levels that I'm going to be watching come tomorrow. On the 30-minute chart, we'll start, and you can see here I have the most popular, the 50-period EMA, sorry, the 50-period simple moving average, and the 200-period moving average. Now, why do I use those, right? Because they're the most common. And that supports my thesis of the entire market of TA in general being a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I want to use what has the most eyeballs here. And this big move that we've had as of late in AMD, this 50 period, has made light work of keeping up, which is a good thing. Now, we talked on AMD on Friday. You caught the weekend video about on the 30-minute, I would love come Monday to see that 50 period from a bullish perspective to get up above $200 a share. And that's exactly what happened here today. It is now sitting right at about 203.70. And it's now very close to the stock, adding that potential layer, right? That psychological barrier bulls. Any downside test of that 50 period here on the 30-minute tomorrow, I'm going to want to see a high volume bounce and pull away, upside, away from that level. Bears, your primary objective here tomorrow on the 30-minute chart is a above average volume downside break clean through the 50 period moving average. Now let's move on here to the 4-hour chart and take a look. You can see here that the 4-hour is not going to be quite as contextual because that nearest level that we're looking at here that is specific to this chart is down at 181. Stock's currently at 205. So really only thing I'm watching here on the 4-hour bulls, it's going to take its time understanding that, but I'd love to see this 50 period continuing upside at an accelerated rate, helping to get some additional feet up underneath this recent move, so to speak. Bears, you would love to see that 50 period flatten out and stay as low as possible. Now, let's move on to the most important chart, in my opinion, the daily. This one's going to paint the clearest psychological picture. Listen, every single fund, institution, retail investor, retail trader, floor trader, I don't care. They're all looking at the daily with the 50-day moving average and the 200-day moving average, both of which are not immediately relevant in the context of this video, looking ahead to tomorrow's trading day, Tuesday. Now, if I'm looking at this daily chart, right, I want what the most obvious story is, and that's the only one I'm concerned about. The more you overcomplicate the daily, the less contextual it becomes and the less of a potential self-fulfilling prophecy it becomes. It's only kind of hurting yourself. Keep it simple, right, and look at what is the most obvious story here, and then decide, okay, how does my sentiment fit into that story? Well, for me, here's the most obvious story. $200 a share and 210/211. Listen, if I'm a bull, here's the story. Any downside test of $200 a share, that's a huge psychological level. I want to see a hard bounce away from that level on above average or more volume. Okay? Ideally, bulls, we'd love to see a break and hold of 210, kind of cracking the all-time high, claiming 210/211 as a new support level. And then in the coming days, we could potentially look to utilize that as kind of a floor, trampoline to move up toward 215, 220. Bears, what's your primary objective here in the near term? Well, ideally, you'd like this to be below $200 a share, right? So any upside test of 210, 211, you want to see a hard above average volume rejection. Any downside test of 200, a high volume, clean snap to the downside below 2 is what the bears are going to be looking for here tomorrow. Now, let's take a look. What was the bias in the options chain here today, Monday, as far as how the traders are positioning themselves heading into tomorrow, Tuesday? So again, to be clear, all this volume was just from today as we head into tomorrow. Okay, so we have 982,000 total contracts. 624,000 of those were calls. 359,000 approximately were puts. So we are seeing quite a heavy call side bias here today on the overall ratio. But if we look at down here and we break this down by time frame, every single delta range leans call heavy except for the 0 to 20 delta range. That's the short-term speculators, right? The gambly style, far out of the money, cheapy calls and puts. Those actually lean to the put side. So it looks like, if I'm interpreting this, what we're seeing here is slightly more traders in the very short term betting against this all-time high. But as you start moving out to the more short to midterm, the midterm, and then the longer term, you start having that bias come back over to the call side, leading to a rather heavy overall ratio, right, to the call side. And again, just be clear, even that 0 to 20 delta range bias, it's not overwhelming. 126,000 calls, 172,000 puts. So listen, always make sure your risk is managed. Understand how the traders are positioning themselves today, both overall and based on time frames, or I guess delta ranges, because the time frame is kind of the average of the delta range. And always make sure your risk is managed, okay? Because of course, the options traders, they can be wrong. Listen, if you got value out of this video, please subscribe to the channel. I appreciate it, and I'll see you tomorrow.